I'm Al Dominic, your host for Looking Ahead. It's Tuesday, December 3rd, and I'm in the heart of New York City at the NASDAQ market site in Times Square, where we're hosting a special program to help participants from the C-suite and board to navigate uncertain times. Earlier today, I moderated a session on cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and major trends and issues around data that included Justin Bass, the Chief Data Science Officer from Crow, Roberto Gonzalez, a partner at the law firm of Paul Weiss, and Georgette Kaiser, operating executive from the Carlyle Group. We filmed the presentation, and I'm pleased to share it as a special episode of Looking Ahead. And I should also mention, as a very quick bio, she also sits on the board of AFLAC. So her perspective is both as a director, an outside director, and also somebody who's seeing things on a day-to-day basis. You know, we've got Roberto and Justin who have multiple clients that they can refer to, but I think Georgette's perspective in particular is pretty compelling given the two roles that she could represent if she feels like it. So again, the question in front of you really is about the key trends or issues that you have top of your mind right now.
So top of mind for me, and I'm not going to say digital transformation because everybody says digital transformation, but I will say intelligent automations is definitely top of mind. And when I say intelligent automations, it's the perspective of automating our processes and leveraging technology to do that. But my biggest issue is the governance and the policies around that ongoing, and we should probably talk about that a little bit as we go down the line. And so intelligent automations, talent is huge for me because we do not have enough engineers, computer science majors, people who know how to solve problems going into the future, and we have to figure out what we're going to do there. And cyber is one of my it's an everyday problem that we all have to deal with. It's not going anywhere. It's how do we continue to respond to these types of issues.
Right, and you teased me as we were walking over because I shared that I read MasterCard fields something like 700,000 attacks every hour, and you scoffed, you said that's nothing. For me, it was one of those things that made me reread the statistics. So again, I think we all come at this issue with a different base of knowledge and interest, but I think we all realize that it can't be ignored. So I'm curious, Roberto, if we talk a little bit about your perspective, what are the key trends or themes that you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. Just to kick us off, I mean, from the law firm outside counsel perspective, especially when we're thinking about advising boards on these kind of very challenging and always evolving issues, I think we think about, at least in this context, kind of three things the board needs to juggle. So one is actually kind of their fiduciary duty to the company and to shareholders to continue to create value. So to innovate, to figure out ways of using AI, big data, which I think we're going to talk about a little later. So that's sort of the value creation part of it. Secondly, though, is risk management. So how to make sure that those innovations, you're doing that kind of responsibly in a way that complies with the ever-evolving legal expectations that are out there, not just in the United States at the federal and state level, but internationally. So I think a lot of companies are facing this, and this is very sector-specific, but many companies are facing this and trying to figure out how to do this innovation in a time of real extreme regulatory uncertainty, where we already have a lot of privacy regulations and other emerging regulations, but you know, I think it stands to reason to think there's probably bigger regulation around the corner, and what that regulation will look like is a key issue. And then there's the issue around compliance with other kinds of laws against not misusing consumer data, not committing unfair or deceptive practices involving data or your data practices, not doing discrimination in using data. And then finally, it's the cybersecurity piece, how to make sure you're protecting all that data and protecting your systems while you're doing it. And I think each of those three, sometimes there's intention, sometimes it's overlapping, but I think that's what boards have to navigate today.
Great. Justin?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of that. I'm obviously on the AI side of things, so really more about driving value from the data, but that's, when you think of offense versus defense, driving value is the offense, but your data governance is that defense side of it. So for this topic, what I'm really focused on is that data governance. I usually break it down into four different areas, first of which is privacy, ownership of the data, especially with GDPR and CCPA and soon everywhere else to follow. Being able to track who owns that data, where does it come from, and how do I specifically be able to remove that person from any product or service that I have upon any request. Second would be any controls to regulate that. How do I make sure my policy of policy and procedure, the what and how, are in place and can actually do what I say I'm going to do. The third would be the bias. How do I make sure that the data is used right and it doesn't have, let's say, latent information or hidden information in some type of analytic or some type of machine learning product that is causing some type of unintended consequence. And the fourth would be ethics. Should I do this? Is it the right thing? Is it a military application? Is it, akin to China's social credit score? Is it something that we should, as a company, avoid?
Yep. All right, so we've already set the table up, I think, pretty nicely, whether it's on the governance side or kind of regulatory scrutiny and the changing nature of expectations. I wrote it down as intelligent automation. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. But those are issues that I think the panelists are interested in. Is there anything in the audience that is on your mind when it comes to cybersecurity, artificial intelligence? Are you kind of good with how we're starting off? Because again, from a board standpoint, you don't have to be in the day-to-day activities. And so again, I'm going to ask Georgette to shift over to AFLAC for just a moment to think from a board's perspective, how do you approach these issues in a risk-based way that will be appropriate for somebody who's on the board of directors?
So it's interesting, I sit on 3 corporate boards, and there's a reason why these boards wanted someone like me on those boards, and that's because they're looking for someone with technical expertise now and cyber experience, because the board's typical makeup would be of people that had a lot of financial experience, but a lot of broad experience, but not able to kind of dig deep into some of the issues that are occurring across companies today. And so when I come to the board, my perspective is around the risk and asking them to bring in their enterprise risk manager or to bring in, their head of security and have them do an overview of what they're doing across the firms and get the board engaged in the conversation of understanding what's happening, understanding the risks, all the factors, how they're weighing things, and so that we're educating the whole board at the same time, and I'm not the only one at the table that knows this. And so that is always my perspective now when I'm on the board and in the board chair, just trying to educate everybody so that, they understand the financial side, now they understand all of the risks that are involved, and this is part of keeping this company running going forward. It's been everyone is kind of welcoming to just a different skill set on the boards now, and I've enjoyed it because I'm able to use my skill set in a different way.
Right. I'm curious, Justin, you talked about ethics as being one of the constructs to a conversation. Could you maybe build on that a bit more from, again, the board's perspective? Because that's a strategic issue that also bleeds into your culture. It goes into the compensation plans that you devise. It talks about the business models that you want to actually employ. Ethics is a big word. Could you tell us more?
Sure is a big, and it's, from the board's perspective, or if we take a step back from the management perspective, is it something that's top of mind for management depending on what type of product or service offering you have, and how do you structure it? So you could have it structured where it's just within your AI side of the organization or just within your product side of the organization. They're really only going to be focused on, should I build a certain product a certain way, not looking at, should I take the company a certain way? So from the board perspective, having that as a constant topic, I think it's important to say, are these the types of environments that we should engage in, going back to military applications or social credit score? And it's one of those things where it's tough to measure. It was one of the presentations earlier on human impact, for example. How do you measure ethics? How do you put a number to, is this the right thing to do or not, versus let's have a constant conversation on, are we moving or taking steps in the right direction?
Yeah. And so as I'm listening to you, I'm kind of looking right over at Roberto, because building a business around data and thinking ethically about what you're looking to create opens up its own Pandora's box when it comes to the regulatory side. If there's not the laws in place or the regulatory expectations that have been established, you're putting yourself into something of a precarious position to build a model that may actually prove ineffective or illegal. Am I right in thinking like that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's kind of the risk is sort of twofold. One is that the regulators that are playing in the sort of cyber and privacy space right now, so let's just take the the Federal Trade Commission is sort of the number one, regulator that's brought, 50 or 100 actions, recently brought the big kind of eye-popping Facebook, $5 billion matter. They're regulating data and privacy issues using two words that appear in their statute. It's unfair and deceptive. Deceptive tends to be, the company said that its security policies and controls were strong, but in fact they're not, or that my data would not be shared, in fact they are. And unfair, they've interpreted to mean, well, it's sort of unfair to sort of not, to consumers, to, not protect their data, their credit card numbers, et cetera, to a minimum level, right? So using these very, very broad terms, they've been doing this sort of enforcement over the last several years. Those terms, though, can be interpreted more broadly in a way that would sort of eliminate or cut into sort of a new business model that you devise. So that's one risk. That's just sort of the current risk. The other risk is that there could be state regulators or Congress or international regulators that put in place new laws or regulations that substantially kind of interfere with what your, a new product or service.
Yeah. Well, you think? Oh.
I was going to say, it's pretty interesting. There was a Forbes magazine, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, on ethics? I'm not sure if anyone read it, about the autonomous car, and that it was in a position where it was between two walls. You could either kill yourself,
left or right, yeah.
You could kill the people that were going to be in front of your car, or you could kill the lady with the baby coming across the street. But someone was going to die. And ethically trying to think about, with the models that are in place with this car, who was going to die, and how do you make that choice? And
this was in Forbes? This
yeah.
should be like in a business.
No, I mean, this is, so I give AI talks all the time.
Right.
This is a constant theme where, if you think of some thought experiment, you have, in that case, it was 3 outcomes. I have 2 outcomes, right? There's children crossing a crosswalk, or there's a cliff, and my car is out of control, and I'm either going off the cliff and killing myself and passengers in the car, or the school children crossing the street. Which do you choose? So there's a human element, but there's also the ethics of once you have fully autonomous cars where it's no longer human in the loop AI augmenting human decisions, how do you build that as a system? How do you put in the right controls to make sure the right choice is made? And as humans, we could debate all day, what is the right choice there?
And how did insurance companies handle it? How does the developer of this product, I mean, it's so many decisions being made around this.
I'll guarantee there'll be lawsuits whether you swerve left or right.
Right, yeah, either way.
Well, what's interesting as the three of you are talking about this, it seems like this still comes back to the consumer approach or the individual's approach to technology. I think that's got to be a challenge for businesses today, is taking the consumer emotion out of a decision that has to be rational. It has to be something that is recurring in nature. There's got to be financial benefit as well. Financial
benefit. You're probably lessening the risk, actually, even though in this case we're making a decision if someone's going to die. But overall, there are probably less deaths overall. But you still have to.
Well, this is why we talk about communication in a crisis, so that as you've decided who goes forward and who doesn't.
Right. But these are good board conversations also. That
challenging ones that have to be had. Another challenging board-level question that still feels very individual and consumer-driven is all around ransomware. Mm-hmm. So I imagine with everyone having their iPads and cell phones up that we're getting spoofed and nudged every few minutes to try to give away our information. But ransomware is so pervasive. How do businesses have to rationalize what's going on today? Maybe we could just start with what is the state of ransomware as you all look at it, and then are there things that people should be considering, again, at the senior-most level of a corporation?
So I've been dealing with a few ransomware attacks over the last couple of months for some companies, and working with the boards I'm on so that they ask the right questions to make sure that the companies have cyber insurance in place to actually handle if a ransomware actually occurs. That they've spoken to the security officers and understand, do they have backups that are happening? If a ransomware occurs, can you back these systems back up? Can you get back up and running as soon as possible? So these are the type of board questions that need to be asked, going forward. And then you have the questions of, do you take the ransom or don't you take the ransom? The FBI tells you not to, because they're thinking that if you do it, they're going to come back and get you again over and over again. But you have to make a decision as a firm, what to do. So your incident plan should be in place already, your business continuity plan. So those types of questions should be asked so that you're governing the company appropriately.
I'll just tack on to that. I mean, I think we're seeing as well that, ransomware, I mean, it's gone through different waves, right, over the years, and it started off fairly primitive, targeting individuals, but now ransomware can really take over entire systems, could even try to attack backup tapes and backup systems. I think the FBI estimates, I mean, I think this number's probably, you could probably debate it, but, $26 billion in losses over the last 3 years linked to ransomware or something similar. What we're seeing is that a lot of companies are making this sort of calculation to play ball and pay the ransom for a number of reasons. It might be that their backup systems are just not adequate. Mm-hmm. Even if they are in good shape, it often takes time, weeks to kind of switch to backup. Sometimes it could be that the sort of administrative authorization passwords that the attackers have already obtained and compromised are the ones that are in use in the backup system, so that you can get reinfected. And so I think a lot of companies, a lot of boards are thinking about, okay, what should we do to prepare so that we actually have the ability to pay the ransom and kind of do that negotiation if need be. That involves getting Bitcoin payment abilities lined up, having a vendor that could actually make the payment, a vendor that would screen who you're paying to make sure that they're not, at least obviously, on a U.S. sanctions list, which would cause a whole other realm of problems. And also, making sure that you have FBI in the loop, where even though their policy is to not, they recommend that you not pay the ransom, they can also give you some guidance and help to sort of figure out, well, is the person that you're going to be paying, does it seem like the kind of person who in the past has not reinfected right afterwards or has kind of honored their word? So it's an extremely complex set of issues, and there's lots of legal liability, obviously, if you go forward with paying a ransom, but I think a lot of companies choose to do so.
But once you start, it's probably hard to stop.
Because then you get tagged as a payer.
Right.
Or, yeah.
So, doesn't that just open you up to further potential issues?
Further potential. I don't know the stat for how many actually have been hit again, but it probably is further potential. It's a good question. It's a very good question.
The only thing else to add for me is, a lot of it should take place on the prevention side. I think still it's the case, I don't have the stat of how many actual ransomware or malicious attacks usually comes from an employee clicking on a link in an email, right? So you could do periodic employee education, phishing tests, where your IT department sends a fake phishing email and see how many people click on the link.
Yep.
We found it's surprisingly high.
Surprisingly.
Well, what you guys are talking about, it begs the question about just basic data privacy and really who within an organization owns that responsibility. So often we talk about the C-suite having an eye on X, Y, and Z, or the board being responsible for the strategic planning for the next 3 to 5 years. But when it comes to data privacy, where should that reside first and foremost? Any thoughts?
So,
That one's for you.
the business owns their data, and then compliance and legal and compliance deal with the privacy issues around it. It's not a cybersecurity, ownership issue there in IT. It's not an IT ownership, but it is between business, legal, and compliance.
Okay. There's not going to be any objections, I would assume.
I was on a panel a couple months ago talking about this topic came up. I think there were 3 of us on the panel and 4 different opinions on where it should reside. So, I've heard all different cases, whether it rolls up to a single head of data, officer management level position that really enforces or at least has the policy and procedure for who owns and who protects and how to protect the data. I think there has to be some type of standard process around that. But depending on the size of your organization, if you're saying all data, all cybersecurity is owned by one group, I don't think that's realistic.
Well, let's think about, let's use a mid-sized company in an industry that's going through a period of consolidation. So you could either be looking to roll up other companies or to position yourself as a potential seller. Mm-hmm. You've got data as a catalyst for your business. Where would you want to explain the risks have been accounted for to somebody who's interested in you or you're interested in pursuing? Like, wouldn't you have to have that as part of the due diligence
Part of the due
conversation?
diligence, and that's part of the operation side of due diligence process. Typically not in the IT side, but they work together in a conversation on how they're leveraging IT to protect that data.
Okay. But the board needs to be at least familiar or at least well enough versed as to how the business runs and takes
Yes.
an
But that's
appropriate stance.
and it's the flow of that data, so understanding the process flow of how that data is flowing through the systems as part of the due diligence process.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just trying to conceptualize, if I'm sitting as an outside director, where should I take more responsibility than maybe I am right now and feel good about that? And then where should I also be looking to the executive team to say, hey, this is not an issue to be, kicked down the road. This is something that we have to bring front and center.
And so that's why I was making the point in the beginning. It's really good to have enterprise risk come to the table and give you an update, an educational update on how they're handling things. Have data management come to the table, give you an educational update, so you can figure out how you're going to ask the appropriate questions to help with the governance of that company.
Right.
I would just add to that, I think it's important to remember that in terms of sort of legally, at least under Delaware law, in terms of your obligations as a board, a director of a company, it's one thing for a company to have appropriate compliance policies and procedures in place. And it's certainly very important that those are in place and that they're strengthened and adjusted over time. But to really discharge your duty as a board member, you have to do more than that. It's not just knowing that the company has those compliance policies and procedures. You have to ensure that there's a way for the board to obtain information periodically so that you're apprised of the risks. Once you're apprised of risks, then how to monitor how those risks are addressed and make sure that there's sort of actionable action plans and timelines to make sure that those are addressed. And I think what you're seeing in courts, and there's a recent case that you may have heard about or seen involving the Bluebell ice cream listeria outbreak, and how the Delaware Supreme Court actually allowed claims against directors, so-called Caremark claims, to proceed, where the court viewed that even though they obtained some reports from time to time on food safety issues, there was really not a kind of food safety kind of apparatus as part of the board for monitoring that risk in a real meaningful way. So I think that has a lot of application to these issues of cybersecurity, privacy, unfair use of or improper use of consumer data.
Well, now, if we were to kind of pivot away from existing products or services and we start to incorporate the artificial intelligence side of this discussion, because the words always seem to get lumped together, but not every company is using AI, not every company is investing in the machine learning tools that are commercially available, but there are a lot of businesses that are being built or expanded using, I think, contemporary technologies. Talk a little bit, maybe, Justin, from your perspective as a data scientist about both the upside and the unintended consequence of going down this path.
Sure. So AI has tremendous possibility, and while it's not everywhere today, it soon will be. It's going to be the case where you take process X, add machine learning, or efficient way to create AI, and everything will be built with AI to augment humans doing something. So when we talk about the data privacy and how it relates to that, you could have a strategy where you're very conservative and you're saying, I'm only going to collect data that I need today. Well, that really prohibits you from doing anything with AI in the future that is so data hungry or needs a lot of historical information to learn and create its own models to predict something or cluster something in the future. So you really have to look at that offense and defense that I mentioned before. How much do I want to look at the future of what is the potential value of this data versus the defense? How do I regulate or govern to make sure I'm doing it right and collecting it right and have the right procedure in place that I can remove particular pieces of data if I need. When we talk about what is potential with AI, I think I could be here all day talking like that. So,
well, to be a pessimist, which doesn't always come easy to me, but I'll try on this one.
Sure.
So while I agree with you that AI is going to power the future of our economy, I also wonder if I'm an individual and I want to opt out, I'm being given new ways to say to somebody, what information do you have about me, and I want you to delete it. I believe there's regulations that are at least being considered
So
that would allow you to do that. And then, again, the pessimist in me thinks, I'm never going to work with your company because I'm going to think the worst of what you're trying to collect before you've built anything. Is that a fair way of thinking it? Georgette's rolling her eyes, so maybe I told you I'm not a good pessimist, but I was trying.
So there are regulations that you can opt out or remove my information from your systems. GDPR and CCPA, and well, I'm sure I could talk about that a lot more than I can. The complete side of it, where it's therefore I'm never going to use anything from your company. I think that will be a stretch. I don't really see that happening because, I think the way technology is going to go, it is going to be akin of, most people here today probably don't know how the internet works, the actual technical computations of that process. But we know it gives us the information that we need when we type something into Google. I think it's, a lot of it's going to be fairly similar to that.
You have to be a realist. There's nothing private anymore.
There's nothing private
There's
anymore.
nothing private anymore. I mean, it's all out there. So if you want to be a successful company, you want to succeed, you're going to have to use AI and other new technologies to move forward. And people will begin to kind of get over some of the privacy items.
fear.
Yes, to get over the fear.
It's just the volume and velocity, right? I mean, my understanding, and I hate to say anything in front of a data scientist, but is that AI, as you mentioned, really is reliant on data. So it's your own data that you're kind of compiling through your consumer kind of user experiences, but also you might need to go purchase data. Or, if you're working with an AI developer, they might want to obtain your data as well for their other kind of uses. So there's just a lot of data floating around, and I think it just kind of creates like a qualitatively different sort of risk level than we've seen in a long time. So I agree that companies, just need to inevitably kind of move in this direction, but sort of really kind of contemplating what that risk is,
Right.
and really kind of getting their arms around it with the right experts inside and outside, procedures, and really kind of just education internally. I think that's the main kind of challenge.
Right, and then your ethics question comes back again because you have all this data, you know a lot about a person. You don't want to use it for bad to change their thinking behavior on how they will do something. That's the other issue. And so
Except
people
buy
say
your product.
right, you want them to buy your, well, that's the thing, you want them to buy your product. So you have to, that's the whole election thing and things like that. People think that they use the data to kind of change the mindsets of people and things like that. So you have to, there's an ethical issue going on there.
Well, as we're talking about all this, I am kind of thinking back to maybe 10, 15 years ago. We, as a company, had a venture with the Economist Group, and we were trying to do business in Europe. And we quickly realized privacy standards and expectations in the EU are far different than they are in the US. Yeah. And so you start to think about GDPR and some of the other acronyms that people start throwing around. If we put those to the side, and I'll ask our attorney to give us some legal counsel on this, what are some of the trends out of Europe that public companies in the US really need to pay attention to, whether they're happening here right now or not?
Sure. I mean, you're seeing certain standards from Europe incorporated into U.S. regulation, but also spreading around the world. I mean, if you look at Brazil, pending bills in India, I'm sure you guys could rattle off more countries than that. But really, I mean, kind of a basic set of those protections are kind of spreading. I think they're getting kind of reinterpreted in different ways, but they're also being augmented. I mean, there's 3 states in the United States that have, biometric data standards. I think maybe the Illinois one is the only one that has real teeth right now. But, that's an example of adding on top of sort of general privacy protections, very specific kind of protections around biometric fingerprints, voice, et cetera. And I think the trend is to see those sort of specific kinds of protections grow alongside the more basic kind of baseline protections.
Well, so when you're talking about biometrics and just different technologies that allow you to authenticate identity, which seems to be a really hot area of investment dollars right now, that opens up the conversation to third-party relationships and how within the construct of this conversation around cybersecurity and privacy and data and artificial intelligence, you can in fact rely on third parties, because sometimes that's where you get dinged the fastest.
Right.
if you don't have the appropriate, again, due diligence.
There's a due diligence you have to do.
But maybe you guys could talk a little bit about what you're seeing right now as it relates to these third-party, vendor relationships, whether it's from a risk side or from an opportunity to bring somebody in to shore up an area that might be weak.
So is your question more around the types of due diligence that are occurring with these third-party vendors, or?
I think I think.
I mean, it's at a point now, like 5 years ago, a lot of the companies didn't want to do the due diligence. We would come in with our list of questions and they didn't want to answer. Now, everyone has their white paper already ready for you because they know that they have to present this type of information to do business with you going forward.
Okay, so then are there things outside of the traditional checkboxes that now exist that you think people should be focusing on? I
mean, there are the check boxes, but there are people that actually go in and walk the building and make sure that things are the way that they say they are within those companies going forward. So it's become much more, they're a partnership. They are a piece of you now, and they have to have their cyber insurance. They have to have everything that you would actually have in your own company.
Right.
I think it does have to go beyond just the checklist where it becomes more of a partnership.
Yeah.
Often we see checklists where one of the questions on there is, do you use open source code? And if a company says no, well then they probably don't have a website. And I would disagree with someone answering no to that question. That is just how technology, the majority of technology is built today, with some type of open source or shared development type tools and code. So just checking a box on a checklist doesn't really give you the actual risk that you're signing up for. So that partnership, looking through that and applying your own data governance and privacy standards to that third party, I think is certainly needed.
And I'd just add, at least in the banking industry or financial services, you not only see kind of banks when they're looking at their third parties, really putting them through very rigorous due diligence. It's not just sort of one time, it's ongoing monitoring and diligence, but you're also seeing bank regulators, sometimes working in concert, stepping up their game in terms of their own examinations and auditing of third parties, especially tech providers that are really, they are part of the bank. They form kind of a backbone of U.S. banking or world banking.
Well, as you're talking about relying on third parties, I'm kind of going back to your initial observation about talent being a concern in this space, because if there's not enough talent to hire into your company, how do you know that a smaller company, like Carlisle's got a great brand, it's recognizable, you can pay people well, you can bring them opportunities that people will find attractive. If you can't find, I'm not saying you can't find them, but if you can't find people,
But we use a lot of third parties also.
But those third parties, do they have greater challenges of finding talented people?
They do, but they're bigger than us. So even during due diligence, we may use PwC, E&Y, so there are lots of third parties that we use to kind of help with the whole due diligence process.
So it's like a PSA we should tell college students to take what classes?
Well,
right, we'll get a better educated workforce coming out?
Yeah, the workforce is an issue. Now, when I was raising the workforce, I was raising it for the whole technology side of things. We're lacking. 2025, I forgot how many jobs you say we lack. How many people we were lacking for the number of jobs that are coming. But, it's becoming this, separation of this us and them society that's happening. And you have a group that's technically savvy and kind of solutions oriented, and then you have people who are the users and just know how to use the products that are out there. And how do we get over this hurdle as a society? There are lots of boot camps and things like that coming along, and so people are getting creative with the ideas.
Yeah. Well, in terms of that creativity, I've seen some community colleges start to have very dedicated programs. JP Morgan's put money in to do developmental issues.
Programs like Year Up and other things like that. And if you look, the financial industry, which I grew up in, it was always like you had to have a 4-year degree. But that's beginning to change also because of the talent that's needed to come in.
Yeah. Guys, what are you seeing on the talent
Yeah,
side?
no, I completely agree with that. The talent will change as technology changes. Think of this, even in this room right now, the general society is becoming more data and technology literate, right? Everyone here has a cell phone, knows how to operate it. Wasn't the case back in the, 10 years after cell phones came out, right? So just the education of someone certainly changes. You do start to see that with, a lot of MBA programs are declining, right? Enrollment's been declining on them for a while, where you do start to see more of the, the boot camps or online education. And I think that's going to continue.
Yeah.
You definitely do still see a shortage on the technology workforce, given where a lot of the development is going. But I think that's gonna you're gonna have two avenues there, very tech heavy and very arts oriented.
Yeah.
Well, let's try to wrap this up. And instead of ending on a decline, let's talk about an increase, and it's an increase in spend. Because I assume, as we're talking about all this, there's a price tag that is going to continue to grow. And so, without talking actual dollars and cents, how do you rationalize some of the investment opportunities that you're naturally going to need to assume as a business?
So it depends on where the organization is in place and time. So some, it's going to be an extreme increase because they're tech debt heavy right now. They have not invested, and they have to get to a certain point. And once they get to that point, then they'll level off and begin to decrease costs. And so there are a lot of firms out there right now that, they were way behind in technology, and they have a lot of catch up to do. So that's been, I think we're going to see, what we're seeing, not going to see, we're seeing huge spikes, and then I think we'll begin to see the level off. With fintech coming along, we're seeing, easier, faster solutions that can come in and kind of help drive people a little bit faster. RPA, robotic processing automation, is kind of helping a little bit there with, allowing people to transition in a different way faster. So yes, spend's going to go up and level off.
Sure.
In addition to those sorts of investments, also I would just remind folks to, remember to invest in sort of crisis management planning, making sure your plans are in place, making sure that the board actually spends some of their valuable time actually doing tabletop exercises, and not just sort of by yourselves, but ideally with the advisors that you would use, forensic advisors, lawyers, PR firms even, that would be activated in the event of either a cybersecurity crisis or a data handling misuse crisis. And I think that that kind of investment will really pay off tremendously in the when an event happens, because
it's not an if, it's a
yeah,
when.
it's not an if, it's a when.
Yeah, I think completely agree that the amount of money will continue to increase in spend on this. It can be a black hole, because if you keep spending and have the best things, your result is nothing happens, right? So it's kind of difficult to see the impact. And then I think, as board members, we have to come up with a way to be strategic about it. Do we invest on our internal systems and, employee education, prevent them from clicking on phishing emails, for example, our internal infrastructure and systems, or do we make sure our external technology products, if we're a company that develops those products, is doing more of the periodic penetration testing or SOC compliance testing, to make sure those are approved. And a lot of times it's going to come down to, do we have a robust kill criteria? What products or services should we just stop using? Or what internal pieces, we have maybe 10 systems, can we narrow that down to 5, so it's a lot easier for us to support and mitigate if something does go wrong?
So then...
I was going to say, back to Roberto, though, then that's a spend, I think, that will continue to stay around the cyberspace. It'll be a continual amount that people will be putting in, like 10% has been, the typical right now, but I think that's not going anywhere, because it's an issue that is going to continue to.
I think the percentage is important just for people to baseline their own business off of.
Right.
So I appreciate you saying that. Roberto, you had a thought? Well, I'm curious, just real quick, when we're talking about navigating uncertain times, there's a tendency to think that is going to pull you in a negative direction. I know that we're all, I think, fairly bullish on the future that's driven by a lot of the technologies that are out there. So if you could somehow frame this whole concept of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence for a board, what's a positive type question that should be on an agenda this upcoming year?
How are we making use of these technologies to, improve our products and services and to improve our own internal processes?
I'll take that as answer number one. Justin, you want number
Sure.
two?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the use of data. How are we balancing the potential potential value from data versus the data governance that we have to build into our systems?
Thanks. Georgia?
And how do we continue to innovate and create value for our company going forward.
There we go. We're going to end on a positive.
Oh, always.
All right, there we go. So let's give a nice round of applause, Georgette, Roberto, and Justin. Thank you so much for this.